Thank you all for being here this afternoon. My name is Rolf Meulen. I'm a professor at Utrecht University and University Medical Center Utrecht, and have had the delight to be the project lead of AURORA for the last 5 years. And I will introduce you the incredible team of AURORA later in this presentation. Also want to welcome you here live, but also the people that are online. Thank you for joining in. It always feels a little bit strange to have a title here that says the project final event. AURORA is still going on. There's still work to be finished, but we feel that this is the time to really showcase where we are in regard to our data and our knowledge and what we think that we can conclude from the work that we have done over the last 5 years. This is also an invitation to the people here live, but also online, to reflect on those results and give active feedback to what you take away from these results and how you would interpret some of the findings that are there, because that helps us to sharpen our reasoning, but it is also an invitation for you to engage with the enormous resource on data and knowledge that we have in AURORA, to think about what can be done in the next few years based on the knowledge that we actually have gained in this project. The AURORA Consortium, as I said, I'm really proud of having been able to work for the last 5 years with what I would call pioneers in micro nanoplastic research. I think it's true that when we started, we all did not know exactly on which journey we were embarking, and I think we all have learned a lot, but a lot from each other. This was a project with 17 partners across 10 countries and 5 years of research. You see here a picture of the last meeting, but that's not the whole team. I actually put all the names that actually worked on the project, more than 45 researchers. They dedicated their time and intellect in the last 5 years to actually trying to start to understand the potential impacts of micro nanoplastics on early life health. Also want to highlight, especially in this time frame where we are, this was a very fruitful collaboration between the EU and the US, where we actually were able to leverage the knowledge from really top researchers, both in the US and in Europe, to actually bring that together. This is a public health problem that is shared across the world and should be solved by doing research together across the world. We as AURORA were not alone. We were part of the CUSP cluster funded by the European Commission. And this has been a large investment and great foresight of the European Committee to fund this research, and has put basically Europe at the forefront of micro nanoplastic research. Within CUSP, 5 projects were funded: AURORA, IMTOX, Plastic Heal, Plastic Fade, and Polyrisk. And I want to thank here everyone that was in the other projects, because we needed each other to actually bring these projects forward. So what you see here is a presentation of AURORA and the results of AURORA, but that had not been possible with also the support of the CUSP friends that we had. All these projects had a different focus. And you can see that here. I'm not going to dwell on that too much. But they all shared something. They all shared that we needed to think about analytical methods. That we needed to think about how do we do high quality exposure assessment. We had to think collectively, if we actually know the exposure and we have an idea of hazard, how do we actually move that towards the first risk assessment frameworks, so that we actually can start to think about how could we actually define policy around this. And that's also where the hazard assessment came in. Going back to the AURORA project, I'm just going to briefly introduce it, and then we actually go into the program of today. When we designed the project 5 years ago of AURORA, we did not have the intention or the idea that we would be able to solve all questions around micro nanoplastics regarding early life health. This is a very difficult area, as you will see in the next presentations, with a lot of intricacies that we have to navigate around. That's where we said that the final result of AURORA would be an actual European roadmap towards basically early life risk assessment and micro and nanoplastics. And that's exactly what you will see that we deliver today to you. The focus on early life health is easily explained from the fact that when we think about particle toxicity, when we think about endocrine disrupting chemicals, we know that the early life is a very vulnerable window in biological development. And so therefore, when we actually are starting to look at the effects of micronanoplastic, it makes sense to actually focus on that particular stage in life. We focus both on exposure, maternal health, and then placenta transfer and child development within the project. As I said, we needed to do a few things that you will see in the next presentations. We need to advance the analytical methods to actually be able to measure micronanoplastics, especially in human tissues. And you're all aware about the current discussions around how difficult it actually is. We needed to start thinking about a tiered testing strategy. We all know that when we think about the different plastics, the different polymers, the different mixes of polymers, the different chemicals in plastics, that this is a large space of potential exposure that we need to cover. And we need to think about how do we make actually an efficient testing strategy that would allow us to actually test the different exposures. We also set out to perform the first human exposure and large health studies. One of the starting points was that we wanted to be able to start doing health studies with more than a few hundred people within the populations to really get a solid inference on what the potential health effects might be. And we were basically building the roadmap towards risk assessment. Already said basically why we were focusing on early life health. It's a vulnerable time window, but it's not only about early life health. We know that the effects in early life health actually pay forward into adult life, where we can actually see adverse health effects as well. So focusing on early life health makes a lot of sense. At the time that we started AURORA, we did have evidence that micronanoplastics did reach placenta, and that was reason enough to actually focus on this particular question. So going to the project and the program today. So what we are trying to do is answer these pertinent questions that we put on the table. The first is, what do we know about the exposure of pregnant women to MNPs? What can we say about that? The second one is trying to answer the question, do micronanoplastics cross the placenta barrier and lead to direct exposure of the fetus, where we of course have to recognize that transfer is not necessarily needed to actually have a biological effect to the fetus. The other one is, what do we know about the early life biological effects? If they actually transfer and are in the placenta or reach the fetus, what does it do biologically? The second one is to actually see what human effects are caused by MNPs when we think about early life. This last question we won't be answering today, and that has to do with the fact that we have been able to perform a large multi-cohort prospective epidemiological investigation where we screened more than 800 pregnant women and their offspring to see which health effects are there. However, given the discussions that are currently going on about the quantification of micronanoplastics, we are doing a lot of additional experiments to make sure that what we see is right before we actually publish on the potential health effects. You will see basically how we do that in the next presentations. The last question that we want to answer is, where do we stand on risk assessment of MNPs for early life health? That's basically going towards the actionability. But we also have to think about, when we do research, how does it actually translate to action? And what are then the priorities that we have within the micronanoplastic field? And this is really where we have a set of 4 other presentations that go towards to that we need a micronanoplastic research standards, that we have to strengthen the human micronanoplastic exposure assessment, that we have to think about the science to policy interface, how we do that, and that we have to think about communicating micronanoplastic science to the general public. I'm going to end with a disclaimer. And for me, this is really important. Being part of the Lancet Committee on Plastic and Health, there is a well-documented health effect of plastics when we think about the resourcing of the oil and gas from the chemicals that actually go into plastics. And so although we talk about micro nanoplastics here, an important research area where we do need answers, it doesn't mean that the uncertainty that we still have about MNPs should uphold any mitigation on what we do have to do with plastic pollution.